Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Don West. I'm one of the attorneys for Mr. Zimmerman along with Mark O'Mara. Can you see Mr. Zimmerman over here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. The questions I have for you this morning are in the same arena or area, and that is, I don't know if you know this or not even, but this is not the only questioning that takes place. People that are being questioned like this are not being chosen or not chosen for the jury. This is one of what will be several phases. So that's why we're limiting questions sort of one-on-one just to the general area of pretrial publicity.
Sounds good.
Follow me on that?
Mm-hmm.
You can comment on anything that you want that you think would help us better understand your answer, but there will be other things that we would want to talk with you about later. Okay? So with that in mind, you said you work at a restaurant which gives you some exposure to news during the day.
Yes, sir.
Do you work during the day?
I work both in the day and the morning. The evening, I'm sorry.
What's your schedule like?
It depends. As an assistant manager, I work both shifts to make sure that at various times during the week, if someone can't work, then there is someone there with authority in the store. So I open, I close, I work mid-shifts. It varies from week to week.
Is it likely that in the course of a week you might work several different shifts?
Yes, sir.
And is there a television that's on at work
Yes.
that you can hear?
Here, no, but there is, the closed captioning is on and it is up in the lobby, yes.
Can you see it from where you are in the
Yes.
restaurant? Okay. If something newsworthy comes on, do you have an opportunity to take a second and look at the TV?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I suppose if a customer is in there talking about current events, it could involve you?
Yeah, I mean, I talk to customers. That's my job. So if they have something to say about anything at all, an opinion about this case or a different one, then, I may hear it, I may not. Depends on if it gets retained in my mind or not.
Oh, sure.
I deal with hundreds of customers daily, so.
Have you been working in this capacity with these kinds of irregular shifts since February of 2012?
Not since February, no.
What were you, how were you employed and what hours back in February of 2012?
In February, I was unemployed at the time. So I started working here back in October. So between February and October, I was unemployed, but my news coverage would have been about the same.
Tell me about that.
It's sparse. I personally don't really watch much of the news because I find it mostly depressing. So I try not to keep up too much because, there's a lot of things going on in the world that it doesn't really affect me too much, so I try not to keep up on it.
Is this one of those cases that's a bit depressing?
Slightly, I would say, yeah.
Why is that?
I mean, Mr. Martin is not here today. That's a sad fact.
Of course, the loss
For
of
anyone.
life
Yes.
life is precious, is it not?
Absolutely.
Is that what strikes you as the most powerful point of this?
No. Not particularly.
How do you feel about Mr. Zimmerman's situation?
I mean, he's in almost a worse situation right now. He's stuck here until he's found innocent or guilty, so unfortunately he's at the whim of the people that are chosen for the jury and what they decide.
Based upon what you've heard in the news, do you think that maybe this Trayvon Martin's death was in self-defense?
I'm not really sure. I haven't seen enough of the coverage to have fully made my personal opinion about that.
Agreed. And you could never make a fully formed judgment until you've seen all of the available evidence.
Absolutely.
Yes. But really what I'm talking about now is just what you know as of today from media, which includes information from family and friends and Facebook and all of the sources of how stuff about this case has come to you.
Yes, sir.
So just considering that, what do you think? Do you think George Zimmerman might be innocent?
Objection again is to the ultimate decision.
Can you rephrase your question, please?
Based upon all things you've heard about the case, do you think that George Zimmerman could be innocent?
I couldn't form an opinion on that based on family, friends, and media. I've heard various reports from various people, and I haven't heard a lot of it, so I try to reserve my judgment for when I've heard everything.
So based upon the information and the way it has resonated with you, you don't think he could be innocent?
I'm not sure.
That sort of sounds like, in order to change your mind, the defense would have to convince you that he's innocent.
Perhaps I could see how that could come out that way, yes.
That the way you see the case now is that he's more likely guilty than innocent.
Objection is to interjecting his opinion as to what this juror has said or not said.
This is for what he may have developed an opinion based upon what he knows from pretrial publicity. The other areas of questioning would be proper for regular voir dire, so you may proceed in that regard.
Right, and that's all I'm talking about, is how you feel based upon what you know so far.
I don't have a fully formed opinion. That is how I feel.
Right. No, I don't want you to think that I'm arguing with you. That's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do, maybe not so well, is figuring out how you feel now based upon what you've learned about the case.
I would say it's an unfortunate circumstance that we're even here today, obviously, because of the loss of life and his life being uprooted the way that it has been just from having to be here, obviously. I don't have an opinion as to whether or not he is guilty or innocent because I don't like to make those opinions based off of what I've heard and hearsay and all of those types of things.
But if you did, so let's not talk about anything that you don't know from publicity. Let's talk just about what you've learned from TV, from any other sources, including family and friends or whatever. And what is your opinion today about that based upon that source of
I'm
information?
going to object, asked and answered.
We'll let him answer one more time, and then we'll move on.
My opinion is that I don't have one very particularly about whether or not he's innocent or guilty. Based on what I've heard and what I've seen sparingly on television. That's what we're here to decide, isn't it?
Yes, without question, the jurors that are selected will be asked to make that decision. So, but you're not being asked to make that decision now.
Correct.
Because truth of the matter is you haven't heard any evidence at all.
Not really, no. Nothing that has been said in a court of law, so nothing that would really make any sense. The things that they say on the media aren't always true. The evidence hasn't really been heard yet. So forming an opinion on something that you heard on the news is a little bit unruly.
All right. So I guess what I want to know is what opinion have you formed about the case based upon what you've heard in the news?
Objection, asked and answered.
We've heard that 3 times already. He has said he hasn't formed an opinion, so please ask another one.
The juror is not going to answer that question.
He's answered it either 3 or 4 times already.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
I'm sorry that this has turned into a back and forth.
It's fine.
Have family or friends expressed opinions to you?
A couple have expressed their feelings on the case, yes.
A couple of family or
Both.
friends? Okay, let's talk about friends first. In what context would your friends have expressed an opinion to you?
Mostly, have you heard about this? Have you seen that? A lot of my friends live in the area, so they too were affected by, things that shut down the city, rallies and things that close streets that we may have gone to normally. So,
All right, give me an example of a conversation, a typical conversation with a friend that comes to mind?
Oh, I mean, we like to go to dinner often, so coming over to this side of town was difficult during some of the rallies because streets were cut off that we couldn't get to. So, it would be, do you want to go to dinner? Well, we can't go over there because, those streets aren't open, so it'll be difficult to get over there, so we go over here instead.
Was there a conversation then about the rallies causing you some inconvenience? Is that what?
Not really, no. There's always another restaurant to go to.
Oh, sure. But what I'm trying to understand, I thought you had said that a friend would say, have you heard about this?
Yeah, like, have you heard about the rally going on in Sanford? Not necessarily even what it was about or, what was going on with it. Just, have you heard about it? Have you tried to go over there? How bad is the traffic? Things like that.
Okay. Sort of not so much about what was going on
Correct.
factually as much as whether it would affect your ability to get to where you were going or something like that.
Something that would impact my daily life.
Sure, okay. That's that kind of conversation. Have you had any conversations with friends about the circumstances of the shooting that were on TV or that you knew about?
Not particularly, no. My friends don't keep up on the news that much either. It's not
Well,
something that impacts us often.
Is there any conversation you had with any friend about the events surrounding the shooting?
Not this shooting, no.
I'm sorry.
Not this one, no. At the time, I do believe the Casey Anthony case was pretty big. That was something we talked about more than anything else. Some of the other events that were going on nationally or perhaps tragedies that were going on around the globe. Things that have large impacts, not such minor ones.
So you didn't have any conversation with any friends about the events surrounding the shooting?
Not really, no.
How about with, when you say not really, that's a phrase that catches my ear. You may not mean anything by it.
No, we
When you
never
say
really
not-
discussed it in detail or, not even really names were mentioned. It was more like, did you hear about the shooting in Sanford? Yes, no, that was it.
And that would be the full extent of the conversation?
Pretty much, yeah.
I'm sorry, not really and pretty much sort of means the same thing to
My
me.
friends and I don't talk about things like that. It's not something that we really, not to mean any offense to anyone, it's not something we really care about.
Mhm.
It's not something I keep up with on my daily life. I go to work, I try and occupy my time, I take care of my dogs and my family, and that's about it. I don't really pay attention to small-scale news in the local area other than you're going to have trouble driving on these streets to go wherever you're going. It doesn't impact my life that much, so I don't care. Tragedies in other countries affect my life.
Can you give me an example of the kind of story that you would really pay attention to?
Something like a tsunami in Japan or an earthquake in India. Something where I might have family or friends that are visiting that I need to make sure they're okay.
I got you, okay. It's really a huge global impact.
Yes, something that would affect my life personally, not something like this. I would have heard if it had affected my life personally long before the news would have covered it.
From your perspective, this case is really just a sort of a local story?
It isn't anymore. I know that
Yeah.
it's been covered on CNN and other national and international news sources. But other than that, for me personally, no, it's nothing more than a local story.
How about conversations with family? Well, have we covered conversations with friends, anything to do with this case?
For the most part, yes. That would be your decision if we've covered it enough.
So not really, pretty much, and for the most part are really challenges for me, because I don't know if there's more there that you haven't told me, or if you're basically saying, yeah, that's it.
There is nothing else that I have particularly to say about it, but you're the one with the questions, sir.
Of course. And again, I apologize. But I do want to, what's the expression, drill down enough that everything that you know about the case, even categorically, is
Absolutely.
something that we've talked about. Have we covered friends?
Yes.
All right. Let's move to family.
Okay.
Tell me what, if any, conversations you've had by any method in connection with the case.
I mean, almost all of my family has heard about it because it has been covered. A lot of my family lives up in the north, and they've called me and asked me, and my sister knew I had jury duty around the time that this case was going to trial for jury, so I have heard, bits and pieces, but never too much of an opinion from anyone, no.
let's talk a little bit more about that. Did you have any conversations with family members about this case before you knew you could be called for the jury?
Not really, no. Nothing more than something that might have been in passing. That thing's happening over in Sanford, do you know what it's about? And I really don't, so I would tell them I didn't know much about it.
So if a family member, maybe from out of state, realized that the shooting and any other community reaction events
Correct.
were taking place basically in your backyard, they would ask you about it?
Absolutely, yeah. They would, ask me, how I was doing and, if it impacted my life in any way, because they know I live in the area, but not how close or how far necessarily, because they don't live here.
Were you able to summarize for them basically what you thought had happened and how it might have affected you?
I'm certain at the time I had something to say, but usually just to get it out of the way, to get the topic off discussion.
Why would you want to do that?
It wasn't something to talk about necessarily. There's always something better to talk about than the news. The news is depressing, especially something like this. I don't want to. It's not something I like to discuss. I'm a very happy person.
You're not the first juror that said they don't like the news because it's so depressing.
I can imagine.
Sure. So the conversations you're talking about now with family members, would that be through social media?
Some through social media or phone conversations, Facebook, Twitter, text messages, stuff like that.
Through your Twitter account?
Yes, sir.
And through your Facebook account?
Yes, sir.
And can you give me a time frame? Was this around the time these events were taking place? The
Probably
shooting
closer to when they happened than, maybe towards the middle of the situation from where we are now.
I think you said you became reemployed in October.
Yes, sir.
Using that as kind of a before October, after October. Do you think you've had any conversations with family members about this case after October?
After October, no, probably not until recently, and it wasn't anything other than you have jury duty coming up. I heard about that.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing as far as, oh, you're probably on that case, but I know you have jury duty coming up. When is the Zimmerman case coming up? Something along those lines.
Did you have any conversation with any family member or any friend within the last couple of months about the facts of the case or any
No.
information regarding what the case was about?
No, sir.
Your source of news at home is mostly Channel 13?
Yes, sir.
Are sometimes you at home during the day if you're working a night shift?
Yeah, I'll be home in the morning.
And would you usually put Channel 13 on?
No, not really. It would be something I would put on maybe for a few minutes here and there, and then I might switch to something else, typically like ESPN or maybe a baseball game or something that was on.
Do you ever leave Channel 13 on in the background? So that,
I haven't before, yes.
Okay. With that, has there been any time in the last year or so where you remember a proceeding connected with this case being on TV?
Most of the time, if I leave it on, even as background noise, I might mute it if I'm doing something or listening to music or something like that. So if they were talking about something in particular, I may not even hear about it.
So when you put on the news in the morning on Channel 13, you mute the sound so you can't hear what's being said?
Correct.
So the only news you would get, I guess, in that situation would be what is bannered across the bottom?
Yeah, maybe the headlines that run across the bottom or something along those lines. Yes, sir.
Do you use closed captioning?
At my house, no, but at work, yes.
And does Channel 13 play at work? Is that one of the stations available?
It is, but that's not what we have on the televisions usually.
Is that for any particular reason?
Usually our customers are more in tune with national news, so it's usually like CNN or Fox or one of those larger affiliates, not so much local.
Okay. Do you get to pick the station?
No, the district manager has decided what television plays what, and that's that.
Mm-hmm. Have you, when you're working an evening shift, for example, have you noticed any any reports or shows maybe summarizing what's happened in the case up till then, or what's going on right now?
Not particularly, no.
Anything at all you can think of
No.
where
No,
you
sir.
might have said, oh, that's where they are in the process?
No, not really.
Should I assume if you say not really, that
Yes.
means no?
Yes.
So you haven't heard any newscast, even in the evening, that may have summarized what's going on in the case?
No.
You know, it's perfectly okay that you did. No one's
Oh, I know that.
questioning that.
It's not something that I would have caught, no. Maybe once in a while I might have seen it or heard it, but it wouldn't have been something I would have absolutely heard and remembered for the rest of my life or even for the next couple of months.
Sure.
I might have been like, oh, look at that, and just walked away, because when I'm working, I am working. There's a lot of things that need to get done, cleaned, and stocked, so I don't have a lot of
I
time.
guess the buck stops with you, basically. at work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What would you say are the three things about this case that do stand out, that you do specifically remember about this case?
That it would be Mr. Zimmerman and Mr. Martin, and that there was a shooting involved. Other than that, as far as the particulars, I'm not fully aware of them.
Did you ever see any photographs connected with the case on
No, sir.
on TV?
No, sir.
Not one ever?
Ever? That's a long time, so I'm sure I've seen at least one, but nothing, as I said to him before, nothing that I would remember in particular that pops out in my head right now, even as you mentioned it.
Is there any image connected with the case that comes to mind?
Just Mr. Zimmerman's face, as it's been plastered over lots of news and newspapers and things like that.
And I apologize if you have already said this, but do you remember anything about that picture?
It was just a picture of his face, just as it is right now.
Sort of like just a portrait
Kind of,
style
yes.
as opposed to an evidence style?
You could say that, yes.
How about, and that's the only picture you can ever remember seeing?
That's the most prominent one that I've seen, yeah. And I don't remember many of the other ones, anything about them even.
Well, can you remember any of the other ones?
No, sir.
So the only picture about
Yes.
this case you can remember is a picture of Mr. Zimmerman looking about like he looks today?
Yes, sir.
How about Trayvon Martin? Do you remember any pictures of Trayvon Martin that you've seen anywhere?
Perhaps in passing, but nothing in particular. Nothing that sticks out in my brain, really.
Is there any picture of Trayvon Martin that you can describe for us?
I know that he was a young black male, and I think that's probably about as far as I could get.
You don't remember any pictures of him where you could identify an article of clothing or a facial expression or a background or anything at all?
No, sir.
You do have a clear memory, as I hear what you're saying, of some rallies.
Yes, sir.
What was your impression about why the rallies were being held?
I wasn't really sure why they were being held. I knew it was involved somewhat indirectly or directly with the shooting that had happened in the Sanford area, but I didn't really think much of it. It was clearly something that was of some significance considering the personnel that had attended, such as Al Sharpton, and I think someone else came that I don't remember.
What did you think? What did you think about the rallies and why a large group of people were assembled?
I didn't, other than the fact that it was, happening in my area and deterred me from coming over in this area as far as going to restaurants and stuff because of roads and stuff like that.
Do you know if the rallies you're thinking of were held before or after Mr. Zimmerman was arrested?
I do not remember now.
You mentioned conversations with family members in other states. Is that just your sister you're talking about?
I have a grandfather and aunts and uncles as well. Not many of them have talked about the case, and some of them I don't even speak to that often. But they have mentioned it occasionally in passing, I'm sure.
Any of those conversations ever include the rallies?
No, not really. Other than, does it impact what you're doing on your daily basis?
And no one in your family has expressed an opinion to you about what they think of the case?
No, my family's usually pretty open-minded for stuff. The evidence needs to be out there, not just what you're hearing in the news. They need to hear everything before they try and form much of an opinion.
And I think, as you do, that's a great thing.
Yeah.
But my question, though, is nonetheless, have they expressed any
No, they have
opinions
not.
to you? Could you estimate for me how many times altogether you've read or heard something or seen something or talked to anybody about the case?
At least several, yeah. An estimate of an exact number? No, I couldn't.
No, just ballpark, just best guess.
Maybe 15, 20 times, I'm sure. It's been a long time since the beginning of, when last February and now, so things get talked about often, especially in the beginning of that situation in Sanford.
Ever talked to anyone who said they think that George Zimmerman is innocent?
I'm sure that I have, dealing with almost 500 customers every day. I'm sure that I've heard at least a few people say that. As far as who has said it and what they said, I have absolutely no idea.
Ever hear anybody say to you that they think George Zimmerman's guilty?
No, in the same regard. I'm sure that I have, but I deal with a lot of people every day. I don't have that much time to remember everything they have to say. Typically, I remember their orders.
Of course, that's job one.
Yep.
Would you have any sense, since you're sort of a one-person polling system, where the divide was in your store?
No, I don't have any idea. It's not something that gets talked about at work very often. I try and keep my employees pretty busy. They shouldn't be watching televisions.
Of course.
At work, at
Are you saying you really haven't talked to any of the co-workers or employees about the case?
No, not really.
Not at all?
No.
Never?
Not once that I can remember, no.
Okay. And the contact you had then about the case at work would have come from the customers?
Yeah, mostly.
Okay. If you haven't talked to any...
Well, there's other people that come in the store besides coworkers and customers. There are service people that service my machines. Those
Of
are also
course.
people that come in my store that they may have voiced something about it as well. I couldn't tell you the truth.
All right. No conversation with coworkers, but you may have talked to vendors or distributors,
Right.
that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Putting that group in, did you ever have a detailed conversation about the case
No.
with anyone,
No.
including those folks? And how about the customers overall? I know you can't remember many, if any, specific conversations, but would you say there's been a lot or a few over the last
It would be
year?
on the lower numbers. Most people don't really know much about it, and it's not something they would talk about on a daily basis. I deal with a lot of businessmen and people that work for engineering firms, and they don't really care.
And what's your sense of it from talking to the folks that came into your store that may have expressed an opinion or made a comment
I would say it's probably fairly divided.
about the same number of people on each side of the issue?
Yeah.
Anybody make comment to you, or do you have any feelings about whether race played a part in this case?
No one's really mentioned that, nor do I have an opinion on that.
Do you think the rallies that you talked about, do you think the rallies had anything to do with the racial aspect of this case?
No, sir.
I have just 1 minute. Thank you.
Still remain seated, and counsel, when you're ready, approach.
chosen or not chosen for the jury. This is one of what will be several phases. So that's why we're limiting questions sort of one-on-one just to the general area of pretrial publicity.
Sounds good.
Follow me on that?
Mhm.
You can comment on anything that you want that you think would help us better understand your answer, but there will be other things that we would want to talk with you about later. Okay?
That's fine.
So with that in mind, you said you work at a restaurant with Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Don West. I'm one of the attorneys for Mr. Zimmerman along with Mark O'Mara. Can you see Mr. Zimmerman over here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. The questions I have for you this morning are in the same arena or area, and that is, I don't know if you know this or not even, but this is not the only questioning that takes place. People that are being questioned like this are not being chosen.
Job, so if they have something to say about anything at all, an opinion about this case or a different one, then, I may hear it, I may not. Depends on if it gets retained in my mind or not.
Oh, sure.
I deal with hundreds of customers daily, so.
Have you been working in this capacity with these kinds of irregular shifts since February of 2012?
Not since February, no.
What were you, how were you employed and what hours back in February of 2012?
In February, I was unemployed at the time. So I started working here back in October.
Which gives you some exposure to news during the day?
Yes, sir.
Do you work during the day?
I work both in the day and the morning. The evening, I'm sorry.
What's your schedule like?
It depends. As an assistant manager, I work both shifts to make sure that at various times during the week, if someone can't work, then there is someone there with authority in the store. So I open, I close, I work mid-shifts. It varies from week to week.
Is it likely that in the course of a week you might work several different shifts?
Yes, sir.
And is there a television that's on at work?
Yes.
That you can hear?
Here, no, but there is, the closed captioning is on and it is up in the lobby, yes.
Can you see it from where you are in the
Yes.
restaurant? Okay. If something newsworthy comes on, do you have an opportunity to take a second and look at the TV?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I suppose if a customer is in there talking about current events, it could involve you?
Yeah, I mean, I talk to customers. That's my